That evening, I joined the local men on the river. Their canoe was narrow, carved from a single tree trunk, and every creak of the woods seemed louder than it should have been. The sun dipped behind the horizon, setting the water aflame in shades of orange and red. For a moment, the river looked almost peaceful until the surface broke with a sudden splash far larger than any fish could make. The men froze. One gripped his paddle so tightly his knuckles turned white. The other whispered something I couldn't catch, but his eyes were locked on the ripples that spread outward, too wide, too heavy. "Do not speak," one of them finally muttered, voice trembling. "It listens." We paddled in silence, the only sound the water sliding past the canoe. The deeper we went, the more oppressive the air became, as if the jungle itself leaned in, holding its breath. The moon rose, pale and cold, casting silver over the water. That was when I saw it, the faint outline of something moving beneath us. It was not fast, it didn't need to be. The shape glided slowly, effortlessly, stretching longer than the canoe itself. My heart hammered in my chest as I leaned closer, trying to see more clearly. For a moment, I thought I glimpsed scales huge, glistening, and wrong. But before I could focus, the water stilled, as though it had never moved. The men refused to speak of what we'd seen. They paddled harder, sweat beading on their foreheads despite the cool night air. When I tried to ask, one simply shook his head and said, "If you call its name, it comes." By the time we returned to shore, my nerves were raw. I wanted to convince myself it had been a trick of the light, the distortion of moonlit water. Yet in the back of my mind, I couldn't forget the way the river seemed to pulse as though something ancient and hungry stirred beneath. That night, I dreamed of eyes under the surface, wide and blinking, and fixed entirely on me. The jungle changes after sunset. During the day, the trees seem alive with movement, bright birds darting through the canopy, monkeys chattering above, insects buzzing so loud they become a kind of living soundtrack. But when night falls, all that fades. The soundscape doesn't vanish, it mutates. The familiar chatter dies, replaced by deeper, more sinister tones, croaks, distant cries. Rustlings in the brush that you cannot quite place. That evening, I joined the local men for a journey down the river. They didn't invite me. I practically begged them to let me come. Their reluctance should have been warning enough, but curiosity is a powerful poison. They agreed only after I promised silence and obedience. No questions, no sudden movements. The canoe was narrow, carved from a single tree trunk, its surface worn smooth by years of use. I climbed in cautiously, trying not to tip us before we even left shore. The men sat at the front and back, paddles poised, their faces set in expressions so tense it was as though they were carved from stone. Without a word, they pushed us off, and we drifted into the slow current. At first, the ride was almost peaceful. The sun had just dipped below the horizon, leaving behind a haze of purples and reds that reflected off the water like spilled paint. Fireflies blinked among the reeds, their glow faint but strangely comforting. For a few fleeting minutes, I allowed myself to think that perhaps this whole Dingonek was nothing more than a legend, a story told to keep outsiders cautious. But then the water shifted. It wasn't a ripple, not like the splash of a fish. The surface bulged just slightly, then parted with a sudden splash loud enough to make my heart jolt. Whatever had caused it was large to large. Both men froze, their paddles hovered above the water and moving. One of them tightened his grip until his knuckles gleamed white in the dim light. The other muttered something low, in a language I didn't understand, his eyes fixed on the ripples spreading outward. The air itself seemed to grow heavier, thicker. I opened my mouth to ask, but before I could speak, the man behind me hissed sharply, "Do not speak, it listens." The warning hit me harder than I expected. Something about the way he said it, eyes wide, tone stripped of any pretense, made my skin crawl. We paddled in silence. The only sounds were the quiet dip of wood into water and the echo of jungle insects singing far off in the distance. The deeper we went, the more oppressive it became. It was as if the very trees leaned forward, watching. The air felt stagnant, heavy with a dampness that clung to my throat. The moon rose, pale and cold, its silver reflection rippling across the water. For a few moments, it almost gave the river an otherworldly glow. I leaned forward slightly, staring at the glimmering surface only to see a shadow pass beneath us. It was not fast, it didn't need to be. The shape glided slowly, deliberately, stretching longer than the canoe itself. For a second, my mind refused to believe what my eyes saw. But then I noticed details, the subtle undulation, like the muscles of a snake. A faint glisten of scales catching the moonlight. It wasn't my imagination. My heartbeat thundered so loudly I was afraid it might draw the thing's attention. I held my breath, leaning forward just a fraction more, trying, against all better judgment, to get a clearer look. I thought I glimpsed ridges, like the armored plates of some prehistoric creature. And then, as quickly as it came, the water stilled, the shadow vanished. The two men paddled faster, their movements jerky, panicked. Sweat dripped down their foreheads despite the cool air. I asked again, quietly, what it was. One of them finally broke the silence. "If you call its name, it comes," he muttered. "Never say it here." The way he said it, not the creature, not the spirit, but simply it, made my stomach knot. To them, the Dingonek wasn't some far-off myth. It was real, close, listening. By the time we reached shore, my nerves were frayed to threads. I stumbled out of the canoe, my legs weak, as though I'd run miles without rest. I wanted desperately to convince myself it was all a trick of the light, some trick of reflection on moonlit water. But I couldn't ignore the silence of the men, the way their eyes darted back to the river even as they tied the canoe down, as though they expected something to rise from the depths at any moment. That night, I lay in the safety of a small hut, listening to the jungle outside. I should have slept, but I couldn't. Every time my eyes closed, I saw it again, the shape beneath us, vast and deliberate, sliding through the water like it owned the river. And when sleep finally did come, it wasn't peace that found me. It was a dream. I stood by the river's edge, moonlight shimmering across the water. The jungle behind me was silent to silent. And then, slowly, the surface broke, a pair of eyes emerged, round and unblinking, glistening with a predatory sheen. They locked onto me, and though my feet screamed to run, I couldn't move. The water rippled, closer and closer, until I felt the breath of something massive curl across my skin. I woke in a cold sweat, heart pounding. The image of those eyes burned into my mind. Some part of me knew then I hadn't just stumbled into a legend. I had stepped into the hunting ground of something ancient, and it was aware of me. The river roared louder than ever, almost as if the Dingonek itself had summoned the storm. My guide whispered a prayer in a language I couldn't understand, clutching his charms close to his chest. My own hands trembled, though I told myself it was from the cold mist clinging to my skin. Deep down, I knew it was fear. I had seen predators before, crocodiles, lions, even a leopard that once stalked our camp. But this was different. The Dingonek wasn't just an animal. It felt like something ancient, something that existed long before humans dared to step into these lands. Its eyes glowed like embers, and when it hissed, the sound wasn't just sharp, it carried weight, a vibration that sank into my chest. Suddenly, the surface of the water erupted. The creature lunged upward, and for the first time I saw its body in full, armored scales running down its back, a tail that whipped like a living whip, and tusks so long they gleamed like ivory spears in the faint light. I stumbled backward, almost slipping on the mud. My guide shouted something, a warning, but I barely heard him. The Dingonek lunged again, this time striking a tree with its tail. The trunk snapped in half like dry straw, crashing down with a thunderous crack. My heart raced. And then, silence. The river calmed, the storm eased, and for a moment it seemed the beast had vanished into the depths. I dared to believe it was over, that maybe it was just a warning, a show of power to remind us whose territory we had invaded. But then, the water rippled. The Dingonek's head rose again, closer now, its tusks glistening with riverweed. And I swear I heard it growl my name. I stood frozen on the riverbank, staring into the glowing eyes of the Dingonek. My guide shouted again, urging me to move, but my body refused to obey. The beast rose higher, water cascading down its armored scales like liquid glass. Its tusks curved upward, gleaming under the fading daylight, and its hiss reverberated through the jungle like thunder. Every instinct in me screamed, run, but some other force, curiosity, madness, or perhaps destiny, held me in place. I could feel the air grow heavy, almost charged, as if the creature itself was bending nature to its will. Suddenly, the Dingonek lunged, its massive tail whipped across the water, sending waves crashing onto the shore. I stumbled back, mud splashing up my legs, but still I couldn't look away. For a fleeting moment, its face was just inches from mine. And that's when I saw it, not just an animal's rage, but intelligence, a cold, calculating awareness. Its gaze pierced me as though it was weighing my soul, deciding whether I was prey or something else. Then, just as swiftly as it had appeared, the Dingonek let out a low, rumbling growl and slid back into the depths. The water churned violently, then stilled. The storm clouds above parted, and the jungle fell silent once more. My guide grabbed my arm and pulled me away, his voice trembling with relief. He said we had been lucky, that the Dingonek had spared us, but in his eyes I saw no comfort. He knew what I now understood. The Dingonek wasn't gone. It was still there, lurking, watching, waiting. Even now, when I close my eyes at night, I hear the hiss. I see the glow of those burning eyes, and I know. Someday, I might hear my name whispered again from the depths of a river. So tell me, if you were standing where I was, staring into the eyes of a predator older than time itself, would you run, or would you stay, knowing that once the Dingonek has seen you, you can never truly escape? If this story sent chills down your spine, don't forget to hit like, subscribe, and share it with a friend who dares to face the unknown. And let me know in the comments, would you survive an encounter with the Dingonek?